Hello plant friends, my name is Victoria and you're watching Plantastics. Today we're answering the question, can you grow peonies in the South? Is 8A too hot to grow peonies and to get them to bloom? And the short answer is no, you can get them to bloom. But there are several different things you need to take into consideration, and there are some things that I learned along the way that I would love to share with you. So the first thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to pick a peony that's going to bloom early in the spring. The one that I picked is the Sarah Bernhardt peony, and you're wondering, how did I get into these? Literally all the research that I did online said that this wasn't possible, but being the person that I am, I was like, let's see, I might be able to get it to work out, even though it's technically probably going to be an uphill battle. So during lockdown, I went to my local grocery store and I saw all of these big fluffy flowers. So I purchased them and brought them home, and they were the greatest source of joy that week during lockdown for me. And I made and come to the conclusion that I want this plant. It is beautiful, it is gorgeous. At that time, I was up to my ears in dahlias, zinnias, lilies, tuber begonias, you name it, I had it. And I really wanted these. So luckily my local big box store had them, and this is something else you need to think about. So the tubers that you're going to find at Lowe's or Walmart are just not large enough, in my opinion. Like Longfield Gardens and some of these other distributors, they are going to have larger peony tubers. And why does that matter? Well, it kind of gives them a head start, as opposed to like dahlias where you can literally grow them from seed, and the tubers, like, they basically can reach the same end result. I found that the larger tubers were able to grow more lush leaves and then the following year have blooms quicker than the smaller tubers. But that didn't stop me. So I had this tuber, and I read online that you needed to have soft and airy soil and they needed full sun. Well, the thing is, you need to plant them like as soon as winter is changing to spring. And you want to do that because they really need those colder days to have a chance to even have a chance at surviving. Because what's going to happen is our spring is kind of hot compared to other places, I'm guessing, where these are typically grown. And they're just not going to have enough of a time before summer hits to get established and send up those leaves. Because I've learned that if it's sending up leaves and it's too hot, it's like the leaves burn and turn brown. So you really want to have them in a time where it's cold. You want them to be able to experience that. So if you're planting them in the fall, obviously they're going to get a better chance of surviving the summer heat than if you plant them in early spring. So keep that in mind as well. Also, these are plants that you want to plant super shallow. I'm talking, you're not using your shovel, you're not using your trowel. You are literally using the little rake that you have, and you're just scratching the surface of the soil. Why does it matter? Well, they really need to be closer to the surface because they need that cold that winter will bring, because our summers are so hot and our winters are really not that cold. They need to be closer to the surface so they can come into contact with those things. So with the soil that I used, I always use the same soil, and I used the Miracle-Gro potting mix, and I didn't amend it in any way, and it's been like that for 2 years since I moved, and it seems to be doing great. In fact, it bloomed for me. I had not one but 2 blooms, and it was really nice. Last year I had blooms that dried up and fell off, and somehow these were able to make it. So I was able to actually see the blooms forming before the leaves were really lush. And they started off, they literally looked like little purple Skittles. It was really funny. I was able to see them grow, and they got larger and larger. And then ants just started coming out of nowhere and trying to eat them. But apparently that's a symbiotic relationship, because the ants are trying to protect them from aphids or something. I'm not really sure, but the ants are not harmful to the peonies. I watched this tiny little skittle of a bloom get larger and larger, and finally it bloomed for me. I filmed a really cool time lapse, and I really wish that I had staked the flowers, because the very first one I had, the stem kind of snapped, but I was able to like use some tape and a stick and get it to stand upright. So that wasn't a big deal. So what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to get a really large tuber. You're going to want to get something that blooms early in the spring. And you, unlike me, are going to amend your soil and add either tree bark or perlite or something like that. Something that made a huge difference in the peonies. So I had this for 4 years before it bloomed, and it did not do well up until this year. Believe me, it looked sickly and anemic. So I put it into a pot, a container, and I did that for 2 reasons. First of all, I knew it was going to get super cold as opposed to being in the ground where it's kind of insulated more. And also, I knew I could move it if I needed to move again, so I wasn't digging it up. So whenever it was wintertime, I put my ice maker, for whatever freezes and makes like a big chunk of ice instead of a bunch of small pieces of ice. And what I would do is when it did that and it was winter, I would put that on top of the peony pot that I had outside. And I think that that was enough to get it to be like, oh, it's winter, maybe I'll bloom in the spring. Because I didn't do that in the 3 years prior and I didn't have any blooms. So I would try that. And I had it in full sun the entire time. So I didn't move it from a shady spot to full sun, and that was also something that the peony benefited from. So it is possible to grow peonies in zone 8A. I did it. I also purchased a new variety. I actually purchased like 6, but I have them in front of my house, and I am hopefully going to get those to bloom within either this year or next year. So I hope that that answered your questions. If not, comment them below, and I'll be seeing you next time. Goodbye.